Maple Hollow was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors. Surrounded by fields and forests, with just a few traffic lights and a close-knit community, life there moved slowly and peacefully. It was a town where everyone knew each other's name, and news traveled fast. But nothing prepared the residents for the day Jessica Monroe disappeared. Jessica was 32 years old, a devoted mother raising her 2 children on her own. Her son, Tyler, had just turned 4, and her newborn daughter, Grace, was barely 2 months old. She had recently moved into a modest home on the edge of town after separating from her ex, Dameon Huffman. Jessica's life revolved around her kids. She wasn't the type to go off the grid. So when she failed to answer calls from her sister Amanda one morning, it immediately set off alarm bells. Amanda drove to Jessica's house and knocked repeatedly. No answer. The front door was locked, but her car was still parked in the driveway. She peered through the window and saw the baby's bottle on the counter and the stroller by the door. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place. Amanda called the police. When officers arrived, they forced entry into the house. Inside, the lights were off, and there was an eerie stillness. Grace was crying in her crib, hungry and wet. Tyler was sitting in a corner of the living room, dazed, holding a toy truck. But Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, and her purse was untouched. The groceries she'd bought the day before were still in their bags. Officers noted that there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no struggle, no blood. It looked as though Jessica had vanished in the middle of her day. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera showed her arriving home with groceries around 4 p.m. the day before. She was seen unloading bags, walking in and out of the house a few times. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. Investigators quickly ruled out the idea that she had left voluntarily. A mother would never abandon her 2 children, especially not a newborn. She had no travel plans, no packed bags, and no signs of distress in her recent messages or behavior. Jessica's family was devastated. The town was in disbelief. Candlelight vigils were held, and search parties formed. Volunteers combed the woods and checked abandoned buildings. Flyers were posted on every telephone pole, but days turned into weeks, and not a single new clue surfaced. The only people who might have seen something were too young to explain. Grace was just an infant, and Tyler, barely 4, couldn't express anything more than, "Mommy went away." With no leads and no witnesses, the case quickly stalled. Jessica's disappearance became a mystery that haunted Maple Hollow. And as the months passed, the town began to wonder if the truth would ever come to light. As the initial shock of Jessica Monroe's disappearance began to settle, the investigation took its natural course. The police started by looking at those closest to her, and Dameon Huffman was at the top of that list. He was Jessica's ex-boyfriend and the father of her son, Tyler. Their relationship had ended a year before her disappearance, and though no formal complaints were filed, friends of Jessica hinted at tension between the two. Heated arguments over child support and visitation had occurred in the past, but nothing ever escalated to violence, at least nothing ever reported. Detectives brought Dameon in for questioning within days of Jessica going missing. He didn't appear surprised and seemed cooperative, even offering his phone records and answering every question. He told investigators he hadn't seen Jessica in weeks and had no idea she was missing until he received a call from one of her friends. When pressed for his whereabouts on the day Jessica vanished, he provided an alibi. He had driven out of town for work and stopped at a gas station 30 miles away. Surveillance footage from the station did, in fact, show Dameon buying snacks and gas around 6 p.m., 2 hours after Jessica was last seen on her neighbor's camera. The timeline made sense. For the moment, there was nothing to directly tie him to her disappearance. Despite his cooperation, something about Dameon's demeanor didn't sit right with the lead investigator. He wasn't emotional, not even curious about how the children were doing. He asked very few questions, and none about Jessica's well-being. Still, without physical evidence, they couldn't move forward. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no struggle. Nothing in Jessica's home or car linked Dameon to a crime. Detectives explored other possibilities. They checked Jessica's bank activity, searched through her messages and emails, and interviewed co-workers, friends, and neighbors. Nothing pointed to someone else. Her last phone activity was sending a voice message to her sister, saying she'd put the baby down for a nap and was making dinner. That message was sent at 4:15 p.m., just 15 minutes after she was seen on video. After that, nothing. With each passing day, hope of finding Jessica faded. The media moved on. The town quieted again. Amanda, Jessica's sister, took custody of the children while quietly begging authorities not to give up. But the truth was, the case was at a standstill. Without a witness or a break in the evidence, there was nowhere to go. Eventually, the investigation shifted into the cold case category, stored in a growing file filled with unanswered questions and silent pages. And yet, something unseen still lingered in the house Jessica had once called home. A 4-year-old child, barely able to form sentences, had been there when it happened. While the world assumed he was too young to know anything, the truth was far more chilling. Tyler had seen more than anyone realized. Jessica's sister, Amanda, did her best to provide a stable home for Tyler and Grace. Though Grace was too young to understand what had happened, Tyler's behavior started to change. He had always been an active, curious child, but now he was withdrawn, easily frightened, and rarely smiled. He became unusually quiet around strangers and would often stare off into space, clutching a toy truck Jessica had given him. At night, Amanda would sometimes hear him crying in his sleep, murmuring words she couldn't make out. At first, Amanda thought it was grief. Losing a mother at such a young age could cause confusion and fear. But something deeper was going on. One evening, while folding laundry, Amanda heard a sudden thud from the bedroom. She rushed in and found Tyler curled up under the bed, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with panic. When she gently pulled him out and asked what happened, he simply said, "The bad man came back." That one sentence stopped her cold. Amanda tried to ask who the bad man was, but Tyler shut down. Over the next few days, he would say things that didn't make sense, mentioning black bags, gloves, and a garage. He became increasingly fearful of loud noises and refused to enter the garage or basement. He even flinched at the sound of a car engine starting outside. Amanda reached out to a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Through careful and gentle sessions using drawings, toys, and stories, the therapist encouraged Tyler to share what he remembered. Slowly, pieces began to emerge. Tyler described a man coming into the house, putting something in a big bag and dragging it. He said the man had a scary arm, like a wolf with red eyes. That detail stuck. Jessica had once mentioned that Dameon had a tattoo of a wolf on his forearm, but he always wore long sleeves around the children, especially after the breakup. Tyler would have never seen it, unless it had been exposed during something sudden or violent. The psychologist documented everything and passed the findings to Amanda, who immediately contacted the authorities. Detectives were initially skeptical. Tyler was only 4 years old, and memories at that age could be fragile or influenced by suggestion. But as they reviewed the boy's statements, something didn't sit right. The details were oddly specific. The black bag, the gloves, the wolf tattoo. He even mentioned the car with the lights off, which sounded like someone had pulled up silently to avoid detection. What disturbed investigators most was that Tyler never wavered. His story didn't change, even across multiple interviews and different methods. He wasn't inventing. It seemed more like he was reliving. While the physical evidence had dried up, this new testimony couldn't be ignored. It was time to take another look at Dameon Huffman, this time with a sharper lens and a suspicion that maybe, just maybe, a child had seen it all. Detectives reopened the case with renewed determination. Tyler's testimony, though from a young child, had been consistent and disturbingly detailed. The image of the wolf tattoo stuck in their minds. They began to re-examine everything connected to Dameon Huffman, his job history, habits, and movements, around the time Jessica disappeared. What they found this time painted a darker picture than before. Dameon had worked for a local sanitation company, responsible for cleaning out industrial sites, including an old waste facility on the outskirts of town. That same site had gone offline just days after Jessica went missing. Detectives looked into his time cards and discovered something odd. Dameon had logged hours there on the very night of Jessica's disappearance, yet never reported that shift to his supervisor. When questioned previously, he hadn't mentioned the facility at all. A red flag went up immediately. They checked his purchases in the week before Jessica went missing and found receipts for large trash bags, bleach, and rubber gloves, all from a hardware store close to his apartment. Surveillance video from that store showed Dameon pacing nervously in the aisle, avoiding eye contact with the cashier. The purchases alone weren't incriminating, but combined with the timeline, they were deeply suspicious. Detectives decided to visit the decommissioned waste facility. It had since been abandoned, with weeds overtaking the fences and birds nesting in the rusted corners. The area was vast, filled with broken machinery and giant compactors. With the help of cadaver dogs, the team focused on one large industrial compactor that hadn't been fully cleared out before the site shut down. Inside it, after hours of careful searching, they uncovered torn fragments of fabric, scorched bone fragments, and partially melted jewelry. Among the debris was a badly damaged ring. Forensics experts cleaned it and discovered tiny initials engraved on the inside. J.M. Jessica Monroe. The ring was later confirmed by her sister as a custom piece Jessica never took off. DNA analysis on the bone fragments came back a week later. The results were definitive. They belonged to Jessica Monroe. This discovery shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a confirmed homicide. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. The remains, the purchases, the access to the site, all pointed in one direction. Investigators built a timeline showing how Dameon could have taken Jessica, transported her in his car, and disposed of her body at the facility, knowing it was about to shut down and likely wouldn't be checked for months. The wolf tattoo became more than a disturbing coincidence. It placed him at the scene in the only way no one expected, through the eyes of a child. With this combination of physical evidence and Tyler's account, prosecutors felt confident they had what they needed. A warrant for Dameon Huffman's arrest was issued. He had believed for months that he had committed the perfect crime. He didn't know a silent witness had been there all along, remembering everything. Dameon Huffman was arrested at his apartment without resistance. He appeared calm and composed, almost as if he still believed he was untouchable. Sitting in the interrogation room, he maintained his story. He hadn't seen Jessica in weeks, didn't know anything about her disappearance, and hadn't been near the waste facility on the night in question. He claimed the surveillance footage was misinterpreted and insisted that the items he purchased were for cleaning his own apartment. But this time, detectives weren't relying on speculation or missing pieces. They presented the evidence one by one. The time cards that showed him at the facility, the store footage showing his nervous behavior, the recovered remains linked to Jessica, and finally, the ring with her initials. Dameon's face tightened, but he didn't speak. He asked for a lawyer, and the interview ended. The trial that followed captured the attention of the entire county. People who had once thought of Maple Hollow as a peaceful haven now watched as the ugly truth came to light. Prosecutors laid out the sequence of events with precision. They explained how Dameon had likely entered Jessica's home using a spare key he never returned. They theorized that he confronted her during a moment when the children were distracted, subdued her quickly, and placed her body in a large contractor bag. They pointed to Tyler's drawings and statements. The jury saw the image he made, a stick figure dragging a large black shape next to a car with no lights and a man with a tattoo of a red-eyed wolf. The defense argued that a child's memory was unreliable and easily influenced. But Tyler's psychologist testified that his recollections had never changed, never been coached, and had emerged independently. The recovered evidence sealed Dameon's fate. Forensic analysis confirmed that the burned bone fragments and traces of hair found in the compactor matched Jessica's DNA. Microscopic fibers from the bag used to dispose of her body matched the brand Dameon had purchased. A partial print found on a piece of melted plastic inside the compactor was a match to Dameon. After weeks of testimony, the jury took just under 5 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Dameon Huffman was found guilty of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and unlawful disposal of human remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, Amanda held Tyler in her arms. He didn't fully understand the verdict, but he seemed lighter, as if a burden had lifted. Jessica's family finally had answers, even if they were painful ones. Tyler would grow up with questions no child should ever have to ask. But he would also grow up knowing he had helped bring justice to his mother. What Dameon never realized was that someone had watched him commit his crime. A small, silent witness with a memory sharp enough to break the silence that nearly kept a killer free forever. After Dameon Huffman was found guilty, the courtroom slowly emptied, but the weight of the verdict lingered. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, headlines were written within minutes, and the town of Maple Hollow, once known for its quiet streets and family picnics, became forever marked by what had happened behind closed doors. For Jessica Monroe's family, the verdict brought a complex mixture of emotions, relief, sorrow, and the painful confirmation of what they had feared all along. Amanda Monroe stood outside the courthouse holding Tyler's hand. He looked up at her with the same solemn expression he had worn since the day his mother disappeared. He didn't understand courtrooms or verdicts, but he knew something had changed. For months, he had spoken in broken pieces, unable to explain fully what he'd seen. Now his words had become the turning point of the entire case. He had watched the monster come into their home, and even if he couldn't describe it like an adult, he had remembered enough to bring the truth to light. In the days that followed, Amanda packed up Jessica's old home. Every drawer, every closet, carried a memory. The kids' toys still scattered on the floor, old notes stuck to the fridge, and the scent of Jessica's favorite lavender candle lingering in the air. Amanda kept the house quiet while Tyler and Grace played in the next room. She found herself stopping often, wiping away tears, trying to imagine how different everything might have been if Jessica had never opened the door that day. Dameon was transferred to a maximum security prison upstate. He remained silent during transport and ignored all requests for interviews. Behind bars, he faced a lifetime of isolation. His cell was cold, his days repetitive, and no visitors came. He had calculated every part of the crime, confident he would disappear into the crowd once the case went cold. But in the end, he hadn't planned for the sharp, unfiltered eyes of a child to remember what adults missed. Detective Riley Grant, who had worked the case from the beginning, quietly closed the thick file on his desk. He had solved many cases over the years, but this one left an imprint. It wasn't the forensic science or legal strategies that cracked it. It was the courage of a 4-year-old who saw something no one else had. That fact haunted him in a way he hadn't expected. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Amanda took Tyler and Grace to a nearby park. Tyler ran ahead, laughing as he chased bubbles floating through the air. Amanda watched him, finally seeing the light return to his face. Grace sat in the grass, clapping her hands. Life was slowly rebuilding piece by piece. Jessica Monroe was gone, but her voice lived on in her children, especially in the son who unknowingly became her final witness. The man who thought he had gotten away had underestimated the power of innocence, and in doing so, he had sealed his fate forever. Grace Monroe, Jessica's infant daughter, Amanda Monroe, Jessica's sister, takes custody of the children. After Jessica disappears, Detective Riley Grant, lead investigator on the case,